Welcome back, everyone, to the Gentleman's Wrestling Podcast. I am Jesse Collings. I'm here joined, as always, with Jason Ounpraseuth. Jason, it's been a few weeks since we've had this chance to sit down and talk. We've been busy with some summer activities. Has anything happened over those last few weeks, Jason? You think has wrestling news happened over the last 3 weeks?
Well, for full disclosure, this episode was planned to be an MJF episode based on a shoot promo, which feels like a month ago based on all this news. It kind of was a month ago, I guess. It was a couple weeks ago, but still, it's ancient news compared to this week, to say the least.
Yeah, I was when I was watching Dynamite on Wednesday night, and I was watching the Vince news had already kind of broken at that point, at least what we had known about the Vince news, which was essentially about just basically that the investigation was happening. And I watched Dynamite. Dynamite's got all this stuff going on. There was the Jeff Hardy story, and there was the CM Punk injury, and the Forbidden Door show build. And I was like, man, MJF, like that time period where like everyone was captivated by the MJF news has evaporated. And I'm kind of thinking long term, like, is that good for his eventual return? If people people didn't immediately forget about him, but he definitely didn't control wrestling news for longer than a few days. But let's get right back in. Let's get right into this. I'm sure everyone is aware of the Vince McMahon story. So I guess we should just clarify what we know at the moment, which is 1:12 Eastern Standard Time here on Friday, July 17th. So something major could happen, by the time people listen to this. Something major probably will happen by the time some people listen to this, an update of sorts. But this is really basically what we know. I don't want to rehash like the entire thing, but Wednesday, Wall Street Journal comes out with an article, an investigative article that reports that WWE's board of directors are starting an investigation regarding Vince McMahon, who's the chairman and CEO of WWE, and basically looking into a sexual relationship that he had with a colleague, a subordinate, in this case, a paralegal, who was working for WWE and engaged in a sexual relationship with Vince McMahon, and ended up eventually signing a non-disclosure agreement between Vince McMahon, where she was paid a substantial amount of money to not talk about it. And what WWE's board of directors is investigating is really what kind of impropriety took place, what were the dynamics of this relationship between Vince McMahon and the paralegal, and probably most importantly, was company money used at all in regards to this case? That's really where the crux of the matter comes. Vince McMahon can have an extramarital affair. That's not going to get him fired. But the relationship that affair has with WWE's corporate structure and the money that WWE makes, and if he was using company money in any way to, in relationship to that affair, in addition to optical issues of sleeping with a subordinate, a 76-year-old subordinate, a 76-year-old executive sleeping with a, I believe, 41-year-old subordinate is not a good look. But just when let's not even get into the most recent stuff, but Jason, just when that story came out, what was kind of your reaction or thoughts just on the investigation, the fact that the investigation was happening?
Yeah, I mean, well, as first of all, you said today was July 17th. It's June 17th.
June 17th, yes.
Yeah, that's how crazy it's been. This
I don't
week.
have. If I was in the office, I'd have a newspaper I could hold up to show.
The news, I think for all of us, it really did come out of nowhere. This came through for the Wall Street Journal and the board of directors. This came through anonymous emails from the friend of the subordinate that they had sent over. And that's where a lot of this information comes from. There's some very big quotes in that story, and everyone else has shared them as well in their aggregated stories as well. But yeah, I think like you mentioned, I think in the corporate world, the idea of a corporate executive having an affair with one of their subordinates, it's obviously a big issue, depending on company policies. But I think the bigger issue here in this investigation was company money being used for this, I guess, hush money payments, and that's really a big crux of the argument. There, it's not really a moral argument. That's really just saved for the court of public opinion. But yeah, definitely it was interesting to read the story and the reactions to the story as well. That like, people like a John Pollock over at Post Wrestling, and even Dave Meltzer from the Wrestling Observer, like it was very clear right away that this was a big story, and that this wasn't just some random sort of affair, just a legal affair for Vince and WWE, which they have been a part of in past years. This was something much bigger than that, especially with WWE being a very public entity in the stock market. Obviously, it's been talked about for the past couple of months. The record revenues WWE has been putting up. Brandon Thurston, WrestleNomics, he's paying attention to the stock price since then. And, before this story, the stock price was actually on the up and up before then. And so, just seeing all those different ramifications that came from this story just right away on Wednesday was pretty quick and fast.
Right. I think you made a point about how this felt like a big story, like immediately. Like I saw Dave was like, this is big news. John Pollock was the same way. It was in the way this story came out, which was a Wall Street Journal investigative article,
Right.
that comes out of nowhere, right? Nobody was thinking about this or expecting this. There was really no reason to suspect it. People can go back and look at the Stephanie departure and what has unfolded since then and say, oh, well, this was a red flag. And perhaps that was, but at the time, no one was thinking that this was going to happen. And it was so different than how normal big news breaks in the pro wrestling world, which is usually WWE releases a press release or a statement saying something, or Sean Ross Sapp or Dave has a scoop and they publish it somewhere. This was, Wall Street Journal. I believe Wall Street Journal is the most subscribed to newspaper in America. Maybe that's old and outdated. Maybe the New York Times or someone else has surpassed it. But Wall Street Journal, basically the biggest news magazine in America, and certainly the biggest newspaper when it comes to like financial reporting and kind of having its coverage on those issues. It couldn't be like a bigger mainstream outlet really to cover this kind of thing, and just immediately it's like, okay. And I called it potentially the biggest news story of the decade. It could be the biggest news story in wrestling history before it's all said and done. I have no idea what's going to happen to this. I think the key thing we're going to talk about a little bit here is, like you said, the crux of the issue was company money used as part of this? Now, according to the Wall Street Journal article, the money that was given to the woman in the non-disclosure agreement came from Vince's personal money. It's his own, he goes into his bank account and withdraws a few million as part of this NDA. So that wouldn't be doing anything with company money. It's just Vince, can do whatever he wants with his millions of dollars. But there was another aspect of the story, which was that this person who was in a sexual relationship with Vince McMahon was given a raise. She was, I believe, making $100,000 per year. And then after beginning the relationship, she got a raise to $200,000 a year. Now, it's possible that you could argue that she got this raise because she was very good at her job, or she got a promotion or something like that. And she got this, raise completely unconnected to her sexual relationship with Vince McMahon. But you could also obviously argue that she did get a raise because she had a sexual relationship with Vince McMahon, or Vince McMahon wanted to make her happy for whatever reason. And in that case, that is using company money, right? It's using money that the company has to pay its employees and using it to give bonuses to someone you're having sex with. And that to me will be the key distinction in regards to this. And then the most important aspect of the Wall Street Journal story, the original story, is that at the bottom it said that WWE was preparing, and Vince McMahon's legal team was preparing for additional allegations and perhaps additional non-disclosure agreements that go beyond just this one person who was kind of highlighted in the story. And that, this could be the tip of the iceberg. There could be dozens and dozens of other women or people associated with WWE that have had similar agreements, that have had, maybe they've been promoted because of it. Maybe there's all sorts of, we can only speculate on it. And I want to be careful about how much we do speculate on it, but it does indicate that this was probably not an isolated incident. And if more and more issues come out from this, that will have the biggest long-term effect on WWE. Vince could probably survive just this one instance, as long as he didn't have too many enemies within the WWE's board of directors and within the public perception. But if there's a lot more, this could get a lot worse.
Yeah, it's kind of like, to use I guess a different example from a different world. It's kind of like the Deshaun Watson sort of allegations. There were a couple women that came out, but now he has over 26, 28, probably even more allegations against him, and many other civil lawsuits against him that really pushes his case. It doesn't really make him look good, to say the least. And so, yeah, for Vince, obviously, of course, to add in Vince's legal representative, Jerry McDivitt, he has argued that this relationship was consensual by nature, rather than being a quid pro quo sort of deal that is seemingly implied here. From the Wall Street Journal reports that, like you said, this woman got a raise from $100,000 to $200,000. Again, like, is this a quid pro quo thing that if you get a relationship with me, I'll give you a raise, or is this just a normal type of raise that she got through her through merits, through her work in the company? That's the big question here legally. Obviously that it'll be part of her legal team to see if there's any emails exchanged between someone from WWE or Vince McMahon himself, whether there is some actual written language of this raise or not, and the sort of basis around it. And so those are the big things that are probably already, while we're talking, probably being looked at right now, of all the kinds of evidence that can be acquired through this investigation that is being done by a third party, from the sounds of it.
Right. And so that brings us to kind of today's news, which is that Vince McMahon has stepped down for the time being. It says, for the period of the investigation will take place. He stepped down from his position as chairman of the board and CEO of WWE. It's being replaced in the interim by his daughter, Stephanie McMahon. And so the interesting thing about that was that yesterday, I believe Brandon Thurston reported back that when asked for what is after, so Wednesday, we get the story about the investigation that Vince McMahon and head of talent relations, John Laurinaitis, who's also implicated in at least the Wall Street Journal story. That's business as usual, that they're going to just keep doing their job regularly while the investigation takes place, and there's no change. This morning, we get this report that Vince is actually stepping down from his position as chairman of the board and CEO, and Stephanie's taking his place, which I found very interesting because something happened between the last few days from when the Wall Street Journal originally published that article, and this morning when they decide, actually, Vince, you're going to step down for the time being. The WWE board of directors has known about this investigation since early April. So, we know that. So we know that they've had, more than 2 months to kind of prepare and react to this if it were to get out. And they could have published, news about the investigation, Vince is stepping down, Stephanie's replacing him, all in one press release. Instead, we got this time gap where they put out a public statement that said, the company line was business as usual. And now business is not business as usual. Vince isn't the chairman anymore. So to me, that makes me think that perhaps more information has come to light. The board has more information since this story has become public than they had before, or perhaps the backlash to it is significant enough that they actually are now scrambling and trying to figure out how can they, salvage this? What is the best way for the company to go forward? It gives me the implication that there's a lot more dirt to the story that we know yet than we've been able to figure out.
Yeah, it's kind of like what I mentioned before, that maybe either Vince's legal team with Jerry McDevitt and such, maybe this is their strategy, perhaps, to really get in front of the story and try to mitigate as much damage as possible. Though we'll probably get into it later, but Vince still has creative control within WWE. He's not actually just stepping away from the company in full total, just more just stepping down from his duties as chairman and CEO. And also, perhaps the other side of the table with this woman, the subordinates in this case, maybe perhaps her legal team has gathered some incriminating evidence against Vince, perhaps that's obviously they're still keeping it under wraps and still building up their case for now. But yeah, like Vince is still hanging on to creative control, and Stephanie McMahon, after taking a leave of absence, I guess what was it, a couple 2 or 3 months now since she's taken her leave of absence.
Weeks.
Oh, yeah, this is like this is how my mind works.
It feels like 2 or 3 months, but it was like last week.
Like it. That's true. Yeah, it definitely felt a lot longer. But yeah, she wanted to take some time away to spend time with her family. But now it seems like she is now been asked to take this responsibility, since doesn't really seem like anyone else can be trusted with that, at least in Vince McMahon's eyes.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with the Stephanie thing too. I want to stay on this topic once. So the paralegal who was in this relationship, she has an NDA, so she's not supposed to be able to talk about it. That's how an NDA works. We pay you a lot of money to never mention this ever again to anyone. Somebody anonymously sent an email, I think, to the board of directors, alleging to be a friend of the paralegal in question, and telling them this is what happened, and that originally kind of piqued their interest and led to this investigation. For all we know, they didn't know anything about it until now, and clearly whatever was in that email was big enough for them to want to be like, oh, we got to investigate Vince because this is bad. I think it's also important to note that the paralegal, according to the anonymous email, the paralegal doesn't work there anymore, and didn't like the way that they were treated there, and they left. So I think that's important from public perception reasons, because I don't know. I mean, again, we don't know who this person is or anything really about it, but I would say, like, a lot of people will look at the story and be like, oh, that was just, someone who slept with the boss to get ahead, and now they got millions because of the NDA. And it's like, well, they left their job at, WWE because they didn't feel comfortable working there anymore. And I don't blame them if that was the kind of relationship. I can only imagine the environment that's like back there, especially for a woman. So like, I just think it's important to dictate that the person doesn't work for WWE anymore, and supposedly didn't like working for WWE, despite the fact that they made, they got $100,000 raise. But so with the Stephanie thing, right? So like you mentioned, Stephanie, a few weeks ago, we get the release from Stephanie that, she's stepping away and taking time with her kids, and she's stepping down. She didn't, and the idea was that I think she'd come back, or at least that was the publicly stated idea. There's all sorts of stories and conspiracy theories about, what really happened. Why did Stephanie step down? Was it Vince pushing her out? Was it, Paul Levesque is very ill and she needs to spend these last few days with them? Is it, Nick Khan push her out? Like, all of these things, we don't know. It's all just speculation. And I'm really uncomfortable talking about a lot of that because we don't know. It's someone's private life. And, but what was interesting was that there was a Business Insider article that comes out about a week after she leaves, and it talks about how, people were frustrated with Stephanie's performance as chief brand officer, that she didn't get sponsorships done the way that they expected her department to do. They released someone who she had hired, recently, who they didn't, who wasn't a fan of the company. And there was even allegations that Vince McMahon himself ordered her firing and pushed her out. And so that story happens. According to Dave Meltzer, so Dave Meltzer kind of refutes that. He says Vince didn't push her out. That's not true. And then Dave, in the Wrestling Observer newsletter that published today, which is already out of date, even though I published it this morning.
Yeah.
He publishes, he wrote that the hit piece, the burial of Stephanie, was done intentionally because they were worried about the perception of Stephanie McMahon, who's kind of been presented as the heir apparent to Vince, as the next CEO and as the next person in charge. If she's taking time away from the company, or she's leaving her position as the company, that would look negatively on WWE, because it would show that the daughter of the CEO, who's been groomed for this position, is out. And that's not a positive sign for a healthy business in the stock market. So they plant this story, which isn't true, that Vince is frustrated with Stephanie, to give off the perception that this is WWE doing a positive thing. They're getting rid of somebody who they think is inefficient or bad at their job, as opposed to somebody who's quitting or someone who doesn't want anything to do with the company. So they plant this story. But now, because Vince is being investigated by the board of directors and he has to step down from a CEO position, they have to bring Stephanie back and make her CEO. But they've just presented a story to the public a week ago that said Stephanie was incompetent and can't get any sponsorship deals done. And now she's running the company, and you just buried her for not being able to create sponsorships. And she's handling a potential PR crisis within WWE with Vince McMahon and these allegations about sexual misconduct. What a backfire story is that they buried Stephanie strategically, and now that's just totally coming to bite them back in the ass. I find that angle fascinating.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing, and it's an unenviable situation that Stephanie is in to handle this crisis that from her father. But it also shows that just another example of corporate people. They make a ton of mistakes as well, and they aren't always as forward thinking as public perception might entail. Because obviously, if you're a forward thinking person, you probably wouldn't put out this hit piece on again, like you said, someone who is deemed as the heir apparent of WWE. It's kind of like New England Patriots. You have if Jonathan Kraft were to step down from his position, you probably wouldn't want to put a hit piece on him, since presumably Jonathan Kraft would take over if Robert Kraft were to step down from his position as owner. Just keep that in the Kraft family. But a different situation here for this Business Insider article, where again, they wanted to get in front of the story, but a bad strategy to do so by attacking her character and her career as a businesswoman as well. Because we've heard before in these investor calls that things are going well, and of course, there's mostly Stephanie talking about her own work as well. But still, there's very, very little indication before then that Stephanie was doing a bad job. There wasn't really any poor reviews from her. From many business articles and such, she gets glowing reviews as one of the top women in business. And so to put out this piece in the Business Insider article is very contradictory towards from what we've been hearing for the past couple of years.
And a week later, you're kind of like you're counting on her to assure your stockholders that everything's fine. Stephanie's in charge, when a week before she was buried. So that's a crazy aspect to this story. And so kind of the last bit that we know at the moment now is that Vince McMahon's going to come on SmackDown tonight, and he's going to be in character, and Mr. McMahon is going to address the WWE universe in a crazy story that WWE has published. That it's not a rumor, it's really going to happen. WWE has promoted it. So I don't know how Vince McMahon in character is going to address um, real life allegations and the him being forced to step down as CEO, and these sexual misconduct allegations that are against him now. Some only one of which we know about for sure, but many of which have been rumored about, and that may be coming out in the coming days. Um, it's it's something I did not anticipate happening. I don't really see it having any value for WWE outside of perhaps bumping ratings because people will be interested in what he has to say. I found that aspect of it very shocking that he's going to be on television.
Well, let me ask you this, Jesse. Do you think this will be a pre-tape promo, or do you think he's actually going to be out in the ring with a mic,
Well,
with a live mic, or
yeah, that's a
do you
good
think?
question. I pre-tape would alleviate, I think, a lot of concerns that I would have about it, but I think he's going to be in front of the audience.
Oh,
It gives
okay, so
off the impression that this is like people's chance to say goodbye to Vince.
right.
Um, because of how quickly the story has evolved, where now he was, running the company and now he's not the CEO anymore. And now he's going to speak, and it's a chance for people to say goodbye to him. Here's the thing about this. People talk about this as like, oh, this is crazy. Oh, only in pro wrestling. People think this is funny. I don't think it's fucking funny at all that there's allegations of sexual misconduct of a guy out there, and we're going to use that for a pro wrestling angle, and Mr. McMahon's going to come out on in character, and oh, what if he's going to bury it, and he's going to say these things, and ha ha ha, that's so funny. It's like, that's not funny at all. This is a serious thing. And yeah, like, this is something unique that would happen to pro wrestling, but that's not a good thing. Like, that kind of attitude is why this situation, Vince McMahon has skated on hundreds of things in the past, and why many other people in wrestling have skated in the past, is because wrestling is somehow allowed to get away with sexual misconduct and all these violations that would get anyone else in a corporate industry fired, but in WWE and in wrestling it's all seen as fine. And I think a lot of people, I'm disappointed in a lot of people who are just like, oh, it's pro wrestling, it's so scummy, it's okay, ha ha ha. And it's like, it's not okay. This is why this industry has so many problems. It's because people have that attitude, and the mainstream media likes to laugh about it and look the other way. And I'm disgusted by the idea that he's going to come out tonight. I really am. I think it's just a terrible thing for the pro wrestling industry. If he does a pre-tape and he says, like, I've made mistakes and I'm very sorry, I won't be around in the future, goodbye. That's one thing. But even then, I still think this is being promoted. They're doing this because they'll get a big rating. This is used, even just the idea of teasing him to come out is using this controversy and this scandal and these allegations of sexual misconduct as a way to pop a rating. And yeah, that's classic pro wrestling, but that doesn't make it fucking good, and it doesn't make it right. And I think that's being lost by a lot of people who just think that this is funny or entertaining. I think it's really gross.
Yeah, I 100% agree. It's a very much disgusting tactic from WWE. The idea of a pre-tape, I saw that on Twitter from a Lucha blog. He mentioned that, like, oh, this is probably just be a pre-tape. Again, I don't know. I kind of agree with you. It could be. It probably is going to be a live promo inside the ring, but I mean, that scenario of a pre-tape is always there, perhaps, whether cooler heads prevail, maybe Jerry McDevitt steps in. Like,
if I'm
maybe
Jerry McDevitt, I'm pleading with Vince McMahon not to go out there, because we've seen him in his late, like, if you've seen Vince as a performer over the last few years, he's kind of old and rambly. Like, you never know what he's gonna say. And I'd be terrified that he's gonna say something on this show, and he's in character, so maybe it doesn't count, but I'd be terrified that he's going to say something incriminating or something that's not going to help what is a very serious legal situation.
Yeah, I think that's the thing too, right? Like, they could try to use that he's talking in character, something that Hulk Hogan has used in his own lawsuit with Gawker. That's Terry Bollea, saying those racist things. Hulk Hogan is not a racist, or Alex Jones over Infowars. That was part of his legal defense. The conspiracy theories I put up about the Sandy Hook children, being crisis actors, a very false conspiracy theory that is not true. But he said, "Oh, that's the character Alex Jones saying that. I myself don't believe those things. Whatever my character says is not incriminating me." That kind of fell short in court
Yeah, you
for
wouldn't
him.
take an actor, like if an actor was playing a villain in a role and the actor said something
Exactly.
horrible, you wouldn't then say, well, you were playing this role. And therefore it's like it's wrestling blurs the line between, I think this is going to be they can say he's in character. Okay. I think this is going to be, whatever he says is going to be a very real promo. I don't think he's going to be like,
Exactly.
um, I think the Vince McMahon, like the Mr. McMahon character, is largely dead. Like when he comes out, he's just Vince and he runs the company. What's the difference between the character and that? He's not really like feuding with people that much. Like it's not like 1998's Vince McMahon. He's just kind of like this guy that runs the company, which is the truth. But I would be, if I was WWE, if I was this legal team, if I was WWE, if I was Fox, I'd be like,
Mhm.
what are you going to say? Like, I think it's a really bad idea that serves no purpose other than to get malicious interest from people who are hoping to see a train wreck.
And I think it's also important to point out that John Laurinaitis, who was named in the Wall Street Journal report, doesn't really seem like there's going to be any changes with his position, or anything like any legal ramifications against him, at least for now. Things could be developing behind the scenes, but as for now, John Laurinaitis hasn't really been named too much in these current updates so far.
Yeah, the John Laurinaitis connection is that supposedly this paralegal who was in a sexual relationship with Vince McMahon was also in some sort of relationship with John Laurinaitis, and the term that was used in the Wall Street Journal article was that they were passed on like a toy to John Laurinaitis, which gives off the impression that Vince is like, I'm done fucking you, yeah, here, you can have her, Johnny Ace.
Yeah.
Which is very bad and is something that should be in the court of public opinion absolutely roasted for that kind of behavior, but we'll see what ends up happening. So let's talk a little bit about what can happen from this. So let's play a game. Let's imagine that a bunch of horrible stuff comes out from Vince, and that the board of directors are like, this is all really bad. There's all these allegations. There's all these issues. There's this person and this person and this person and this person. And, you use company money or anything like that. The way the company is structured, Vince McMahon maintains about 80% of the voting power in the board of directors. So all of the board of directors could be like, Vince, you need to go. And Vince can be like, fuck you, I'm not leaving. So what can happen from there? And there are a few other scenarios, but there is this world that exists where Vince McMahon should be gone, like needs to be gone, but he refuses to leave because he's Vince McMahon. And I think a lot of people would assume that would be likely, that he'd go out, kicking and screaming, and then they can take the company from his cold, dead hands.
Yeah, you can pull. I guess if the investigation turns out that this is like some some type of quid pro quo sexual misconduct, then yeah, presumably a lawsuit will come out from that, and ramifications of that will probably just be a civil suit. Whether or not that will affect his voting power within the company is unclear or not. I highly doubt that. I guess it depends what else comes out from this investigation. Like you said, maybe more more devastating details come out against Vince McMahon. But yeah, like what comes out from after that is very unclear, because Vince is the majority shareholder. That's why he is the chairman of the board. He owns a lot of voting power. It would probably have to be something internal, whether his family convinces him that he to step down completely from his role in WWE. That seems very unlikely. It just doesn't really seem like in Vince's character that he would actually just, even from his own family, be convinced in that type of way. But who knows, right? Like, we never expected this story to happen. And so I guess anything can happen, presumably.
Yeah. So, what you say is true is that they can't really take it away from him. Um, this is a major story. It's everywhere. Any news outlet is covering it. Usually it's on the front pages of many, many, news websites. It's not just something on the Wall Street Journal, especially today, which, WWE is kind of, by making the move to have him sit down and replace him with Stephanie, has thrown accelerant on it. Like that's probably something they probably didn't want to do, right? They wanted to kind of let the investigation's happening and let the story die and, we'll survive. But the fact that they've made the jump to get rid of the, to put out the press release saying Stephanie's in charge and now Vince is speaking, they're not hiding from the attention at this point, which means they're probably trying to get out in front of worse things to come. But because the mainstream media is all over this story at the moment, that puts more pressure on the company than usual. Like, as opposed to if it was just a controversy that, Dave Meltzer and the wrestling newsletters and wrestling sites were covering. This is something that expands far beyond those horizons and puts more pressure on the company than to be expected. So with that being said, what if we're projecting the end of Vince McMahon as someone with anything to do with WWE, as someone who is in charge of creative, as someone who is the chairman of the board and the CEO of the company, what I would envision would have to happen is there's possibilities of like a hostile takeover. Like, there are ways for someone who has a majority of the voting power to lose control over their own company if enough things happen. And there are steps that the board of directors can make. I'm not a legal expert. I don't know. I can't explain it exactly how it is going to happen, but it could happen. It's not impossible, and it's happened with other large companies in the past. But my idea for how this would possibly play out in a way that he would lose authority would be this situation goes full-blown Harvey Weinstein, just all of these stories, a big investigative, another big investigative piece by, I don't know if it'd be Ronan Farrow, but someone within the company, someone within, a major mainstream news outlet that talks to people, and it becomes all these more allegations. Vince McMahon becomes like this Harvey Weinstein-like figure. For people who don't know or forgot, Harvey Weinstein was a very, very powerful movie executive who used his authority as a executive in Hollywood to have, sex with people, to, force himself upon women, to force people to have sex with them. And if they refused, he attempted and sometimes successfully ended their careers using his authority. So I'm not saying Vince McMahon did that kind of stuff. He has one strike against him as opposed to Harvey Weinstein, who has many, many, many. Although you could argue that Vince has many too. We just, don't talk about those ones that much. But let's just say there's a lot more dirt on him, and this becomes like a Weinstein-like situation. To a lot of people, Vince McMahon is WWE. The brand of WWE is Vince McMahon's brand. If Vince McMahon becomes toxic and poisonous, WWE becomes toxic and poisonous, and advertisers won't want anything to do with the product. Sponsors won't want anything to do with the product. Corporate business partners won't want anything to do with the product. And all of a sudden, this cash cow of WWE is totally in jeopardy because Vince McMahon is running the company, and everyone sees him as this incredibly unpalpable monster of a person. Same way people saw Weinstein. Or Bill Cosby, or some of these other very powerful people that have seen, that have been, destroyed in the entertainment industry by their actions of sexual misconduct. So that to me would be, Vince would have no choice but to go if he were to poison this. Something that I think is going underreported that Dave Meltzer said on Wrestling Observer Radio a few days ago is that the Fox and USA deals, they have morale clauses. Like, if they feel like they're not, WWE is a risk to their, corporate brand and identity, they'll cancel those TV deals. And WWE's trying to negotiate its next TV deals that, are the entire financial strength of the company come from those. So if those are in jeopardy, and if those are thin ice, Vince is going to go. Like, there's no way, unless he just is totally fine with a company totally collapsing and burning around him. And so to me, that's what would have to happen, is he would have to become so poisonous and toxic that it would jeopardize all of the real cash assets that WWE has. And people will say, NBCU, USA Network really needs WWE because it produces these ratings, and if they don't have that, then they'll have nothing, and the network will be terrible. Comcast is a gigantic company. Okay, they're not going to let, if it really becomes poisonous and really becomes toxic, they're not going to let the fact that SmackDown, WWE Raw is anchoring their Monday night lineup get in the way of that. They're going to make a move because it has a chance to really look bad on them. And it's happened before. Successful television shows have been canceled because of issues going on with the people associated with the shows, whether they be actors or producers or directors or anything like that. And so that is how I would predict that we would see Vince removed from the company. It would have to be where their big money deals would be at risk, essentially, if he were to continue to be associated with the product.
Yeah, it would definitely have to be some type of forceful action that needs to happen. And, for a lot of these companies, that's usually the case. Like you said, it's usually the advertisers and sponsors that speak a lot more than the court of public opinion, because obviously money is the main driver of these forces. And once those wells dry up, there's not a lot of actions to take after that. You're just kind of just bleeding dry from that point there. And like you said, companies are very quick to act on some type of these moral issues. Like for Disney, for example, when Gina Carano had her controversial tweets and comments revealed, they fired her right away, and she was a decently important character on her show on The Mandalorian. But they have a very clear policy, and with their other actions aside, they have a very public persona that they want to maintain. And same for NBC and Fox. They have a very clear distinction of where they stand as a company, and they are only willing to tolerate so much. Especially for Fox, for example, like they have really done a very interesting job of distancing the entertainment side from the news side, because obviously Fox News is very polarized and controversial for many different reasons, and people very rarely do people associate Fox Sports with Fox News, right? Even though they're all under the same umbrella. But still, like, the company has done a good job at distancing those kind of entities. And for those companies, Raw drives in ratings when there's not Monday Night Football, but still there's other sports on, and the competition for these sports continues to grow, especially as Apple continues to make strides with Apple TV, and Amazon, they're making strides in the NFL. And so, these companies, they're willing to pay a lot for the other brands, and it's not really just a one all be all with WWE. And WWE is not big enough to the point where they're irreplaceable. Like the companies will find a way to replace that kind of product. It'll be trial and error, but they're willing to do that rather than deal with a sinking ship.
Yeah, and it's like, so you mentioned court of public opinion and sponsorships, like it's all one and the same, right? If the court of public opinion is like, nothing, oh no, WWE, that's terrible, Vince McMahon, oh, he's a monster, like, no, which I think people's opinions probably should be that anyway, based on all the other things that Vince McMahon has done in the past. Yeah. But if people are like that, then the sponsors are going to be like, well, we're not going to be associated with your toxic product. And so that is where the court of public opinion comes into play, where if that becomes a big enough issue, and the fact that all these mainstream outlets are now essentially running stories today that are like, Vince McMahon is a pig, that does play a factor. And maybe the reason that he stepped down during these allegations is because there was already pressure being put on the company to be like, what are you going to do about this guy? Now he's going to appear on their television product and make this big public appearance. So maybe that changes things a bit, but I think it's likely that there could have already been some pressure from sponsors and, valuable corporate partners. They're like, WWE, you got to do something about this, because we don't want to hear it if something bad happens. So Vince is still in charge of the creative, right? That was made clear is that he's still in charge of creative, which I think is what most wrestling fans and really a lot of people in general care about, right? Is Vince still the creative guy? I mean, if he, I don't care that he's not in, he's not the CEO anymore and he's not in the boardroom, yelling at people or whatever. But and for what it's worth, people have reported, including Brandon Thurston, have said that like Vince is still the CEO. This is just like an optics move. Stephanie is taking over. So is Stephanie really in charge, or is she just, cover for Vince? But what I would say about that is Vince. So Vince is still in charge of creative. Let's imagine a world where this whole thing sinks and Vince is ousted and he has nothing to do with the product. What do you think about that? Like the post WWE Vince McMahon? Because everyone just expected he'd have it until he died, but let's just say that this is the end for him. In a few weeks, he's no longer doing anything with the product. Like, what does that mean to you as like a wrestling fan?
I would say that's like a monumental loss because I think, as you mentioned earlier, like people associate WWE with Vince McMahon, similar to how people associate the UFC with Dana White, even though like Dana White isn't really like the majority owner. I think the UFC is sold, but still Dana White maintains, I guess similar to Vince McMahon, a very much the matchmaking role in UFC, and he's still the face of UFC, even though he's not the sole owner
He's an
of
employee.
the league. Yeah, basically. But still, I don't think people think that, right? I think people still think Dana White owns UFC. This is his. And I think people think the same of Vince McMahon. Like you said earlier, like people associate him with the creative control. Like no one really cares that, oh, he's the chairman CEO. Like, is that's probably just a character, part of his character. Like, I don't think people I think that's going to be the big aspect of that, is that an end of an era is what many headlines will probably be when Vince in a post Vince McMahon world in WWE, and there will probably be a downturn from that, both from a business side and I guess maybe on screen as well. I mean, there's going to be some growing pains from there, because there will be a lot of talk of Vince McMahon on television even after he's left. There'll probably be a lot of mentions of him, and what happens after that sort of I guess warning period is very much up in the air.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So I think a lot of people operate under the assumption that Vince McMahon has lost touch as a creative guy, and all these angles and stuff are booked to appease him, and that if he were to leave, the company would get a lot better. That Vince has this tyrannical grip over creative, and it's stunting all these talented wrestlers can't get over because of it, and Vince can't make up his mind and all this stuff. That's a pretty commonly held belief, right? Is that when Vince McMahon dies, things will get better because he's a madman and we need to have a better, he's holding back, a lot of talented people, right? So I wonder so the big question would be, who would take over for Vince if he were to no longer be in charge of creative? Everyone assumed it would be Paul Levesque. I would assume that's not the case because, first of all, he lost favor with the NXT, kind of collapse of his run in NXT. So he's kind of lost favor, at least with Vince, which is what matters at the moment. And I don't know if Vince leaves, maybe he doesn't get the chance to name his successor. And if Stephanie's in charge, maybe she's like, yeah, my husband, he'll take over. But there's also the health issues with Paul Levesque, that the idea that he maybe can't return to a job that would be as encompassing and as stressful as head of creative for WWE and kind of like the main person responsible for the product. So who else would be, Bruce Pritchard, who's kind of Vince McMahon's right-hand man, probably would at least get the interim title, of head of creative. John Laurinaitis, various other people backstage. You could make a case for Paul Heyman. You could make a case for, some of their other writers and producers. I would, but Like, would any of those people be better than Vince? Probably, maybe. I don't know. I think that the assumption that someone could step in and this product would be immediately be better is unfounded. Like, I know Vince is bad, but Vince has also controlled the product for so long and done so much long-term damage that I don't think you can just put out anyone who would be relatively competent. I think you would have to put out somebody who would really know how to get things done and restore fans' faith in the company that has waned over decades of Vince's ineptitude.
Yeah, and for the most part, guys like Pritchard and Laurinaitis, like they've operated like their direction is just more catering to Vince's direction. Like we don't really have a full gauge of like what direction Laurinaitis would take the company if he was head writer, and what the wrestling would look like, what the shows would look like. Same thing with Bruce Pritchard. Like we kind of have a sense for it, from especially for Bruce Pritchard when he talks on his podcast. But still, like
And he did
he's mostly
TNA, for a while.
yeah, he did TNA as well. But still, like he's always just for the most part in his WWE tenure, he's catering to Vince's needs. Like whatever direction he takes, it may be his idea, but it's his idea of what Vince McMahon wants for television. And of course, yeah, he did have his TNA run, but still, like I would say a short sample size compared to his WWE career.
Yeah. Bruce's best skill is that he can write for Vince and that he knows what Vince likes. And that's how he's been able to, gain more power and authority backstage, as writing for Raw and now writing control of SmackDown and kind of, he's, got a hand, I think, in NXT. Because he knows what Vince likes. And that's the most important asset you can have if you're looking to succeed in WWE, is to understand how to cater towards Vince. What I think is we have all these figures, these old wrestling people, these carny, political people that know how to play the game, Triple H and Pritchard and Laurinaitis and Heyman and Kevin Dunn, right?
Yeah.
As bad as Vince is, the ultimate authority and power he has over everything, I think, keeps a lot of these people in check. And the fear of, Vince firing them or Vince not being happy with them keeps the company within a very specific vision. I don't think it's a good vision. I think it's in some ways somewhat inconsistent because Vince can't make up his mind of what he wants and who he wants to push, and he gets bored very easily. But the idea of let's cater towards Vince McMahon is a vision that has some singularity to it, and it kind of keeps everyone in line. Remove Vince from the picture. There's no obvious successor. These guys are going to have their knives out. They're going to be politicking. They're going to be trying to curry favor with, if it's Stephanie McMahon, whether it's Nick Khan, whether it's someone else who's on the business side, the board of directors as a whole, any of those people, they're going to be trying to, fight and get their guys over. And you're going to see little factions break out. It's going to be like WCW kind of once Eric Bischoff kind of lost his autonomous control over the company, where there's little factions and guys have, are aligned, some producers are aligned with some talent and other agents and producers are aligned with other talent. And that one week someone gets pushed and then the other week they get buried because they're, it's going to be very political, and it's going to be very, they're all going to be these warring factions because there's going to be a huge power vacuum. It's like, it's almost like this brutal dictator that was running this country.
Yeah.
That things are bad during the brutal dictator reign, but everyone at least knows that he's in charge, and kind of the fealty we have towards that guy, avoids full-fledged chaos from breaking out. But if the dictator dies and there's no obvious heir, all these giant civil war breaks out, right? This has happened many times in history. Ivan the Terrible in Russia, was running Russia. His name's Ivan the Terrible. I can give you an idea of what his he wasn't the most progressive leader, but everyone was afraid of him because he was Ivan the Terrible, and he allegedly killed his own son, and all of these things, happened. And then he died, and there was this really long period in Russia called the Time of Troubles, where all this total chaos it's a crazy time. It's actually very interesting. People want to read about it, or just Wikipedia the Time of Troubles. But it's this whole idea. It's just like the dictator died, and now it's just total chaos because we don't know what to do. And all these underlings are trying to gain control and become the new dictator. And I see WWE is going to evolve like that unless they really replace someone who has like total authority and control. And I just don't think that's going to happen. One of Vince McMahon's advantages as a leader over the years has been his complete control over the product, because he owns the company. He controls the voting stock. He's in charge. If he doesn't like you, you're fired. There's nothing you can do about it. It's a position that Tony Khan enjoys as well. I think Tony Khan is better creatively than Vince. But part of the reason Tony is able to be as successful and have these people work underneath him and all these things is because he's in charge and you can't piss him off because he runs everything. And you can't really play the political game like you could with WWE. I don't know if Jason.
Yeah, I mean, to use you're kind of near the end there, but yeah, I definitely agree with you that, like, I think Vince Russo is a very good example of what you mentioned there. Vince Russo under Vince McMahon's check, in moderation, had delivered some good angles and good storylines. But when he was left to his own devices in the WCW, and when Eric Bischoff lost control in WCW, it was a shit show for WCW, and also his tenure at TNA as well. And I definitely agree that, like, there will be factions made in a post Vince world where you'll probably have more hit pieces, for, like the Business Insider one, but just in the wrestling landscape where, people will leak information that, like, oh, Paul Levesque, he favors this person over, my guy who's better, or, Stephanie McMahon, she's a tyrannical leader, or, Bruce Pritchard, he's out of touch and all that there. You're probably going to get all those leaks in that case there, as everyone tries to look more favorable in the eyes of wrestling fans, and try to divide the fan base, and really to try to create favor for themselves. And that's the big thing there, where, like, when a clear successor isn't really made, it's more implied, but still, like, you also don't want to concede control, like a dictator, as you mentioned. It's gonna be messy after that. To use a current example, like in North Korea, that's a big thing for North Korean politics. Like, if Kim Jong-un dies, who takes over? His uncle, his sister, his kid is way too young to take control. So obviously it's going to be a proxy leader. And throughout history, proxy leaders, it gets pretty messy when you have a proxy leader in for a child leader. And so obviously, two different situations there with WWE, but still, like, there, Stephanie is presumed to take control, but is she just gonna run the business side of things, or is she also going to do both, like Vince McMahon? It seems unlikely, since I think we all agree that, like, handling both sides of the table, both on the on-screen wrestling side and the business side, is a pretty stressful and tenuous job for any normal person. And so, but also, like you said, Paul Levesque, he has heart problems, and so he's probably not going to do all the wrestling stuff himself. And so it's just going to be a very messy situation if Vince steps down or passes away or dies, and someone else is, slated to take over WWE.
Yeah, I think so. Like, to get back to, like, I think the idea that like the product is gonna immediately improve and be better automatically because Vince is gone and Vince is bad at his job, I think that's totally different. And I don't know what fans like. I think there's a lot of fans that have loyalty to Vince, and once Vince dies and they realize that they're not watching Vince McMahon's wrestling product anymore, they might stop watching. I think maybe some fans come back because they didn't like what Vince had done with the product, but I think that there's a lot of uncertainty there, and we don't know what their succession plan is. They might not have one. It looked like it was going to be Paul Levesque, but like, as we said, there's reasons why that isn't the case. So it's definitely something that I think is really interesting and is now worth monitoring, given the circumstances of this investigation and what could come from it.
Yeah, and of course, Nick Khan is the president, and so, but I think he'll just be more, again, a factor for the business side of things for WWE. I don't know if he has any ambitions to take over as chairman or CEO. But certainly he's going to be in consideration, considering the job he's done signing these big television deals for WWE and possibly renegotiating them. Obviously, now with this investigation that Vince is under, that might halt those renegotiations, or if WWE does sign one, it could possibly be an unfavorable one from a business side of things for them, because a Comcast, NBC, Universal, and Fox, they probably don't want to take as much risk on signing a bigger deal, whether it's a 15% increase from the last deal or even larger than that. It could be possibly be a deal that WWE falls under on because of this investigation. And they don't sign as big of a deal as these other sports leagues are doing right now, just going much higher percentages than they did in their previous deals before.
Yeah, I mean, it's not awesome timing that this investigation is happening right as they're getting ready to negotiate more TV deals. And I think they're in the process of negotiating like their second day rights. Like they have the deal with Hulu now, that Hulu pays a certain amount of money to get like Raw the next day or SmackDown the next day on their streaming service. That could be something that is going to be more lucrative going forward. And they're trying to negotiate that now. And now there's some uncertainty about the future of the product in a way that really didn't exist at the start of this week. I checked, there doesn't appear to be any major breaking news that's happened in the last hour that we've been recording this. Do you have anything else we can get to that you want to bring up?
No. Obviously, just to mention that the reporter, Alex Sherman with CNBC, he's the one that reported that the Stephanie McMahon stepping up as CEO is probably an optics move for Vince McMahon. And so again, just more highlighting the more mainstream coverage that's coming out from this. And it's probably only going to get bigger, especially if, presumably if Vince McMahon is set to speak in front of a live audience, maybe in SmackDown tonight.
Yeah, I mean, who knows what's going to happen over the next few days, but it could be, it's already been pretty wild and it could get a lot more wild. I think it'll be interesting to see how long mainstream media follows this story. And probably that depends on how many more shoes there are left to drop. It could be something that, blows over in a couple of days. It could be something that they, kind of changes the way mainstream media evaluates WWE. Because I think WWE's enjoyed a very soft relationship with a lot of mainstream outlets lately. And this might end up being something that you just can't ignore, and it might change the way the company is covered and presented as a whole. So that's it. That'll wrap it up. Appreciate everyone who's been listening to us. We'll be back. Should be back in 2 weeks as opposed to the long layoff that took place this week, and hopefully something. I always say like we're gonna do this, and then something crazy happens, and obviously. Yesterday, I was like, we got to pivot. We can't talk about the MJF thing. We got to talk about this. So I hesitate to say what we're going to talk about next, but there are some things on the burner. But we appreciate everyone who's been listening, and we will see you all very soon.